So it's 10 years from conception to reality. And I just kept interviewing people. I got them by word of mouth. People recommended people to me, or I tracked them down. And in the end, I think I did about 71 interviews face-to-face. Another 9 people sent in recollections by writing about Larundel. So there were a mountain of transcripts to transcribe after this, because some of the interviews were 2 hours. Like, it was just a mountain of work, and I was really drowning in it. And I thought, I can't do this project. It's too big. I can't do it. It's impossible. And so I sort of stopped doing anything for a while. I kept interviewing and just had them all on file, audio file. And then I stopped doing stuff. And then I thought, it's got to get done. So I thought, how can I do this? So I phoned a friend, and it was Margaret Leggett, who I've known for 1,000 years. And I said, do you want to be my co-author? So I invited Margie to be my co-author, and with Margie, we got the transcripts done. We paid some people to do some transcripts, and we started writing actually in about 2016 or 17. And then we eventually had a book ready to go. And so it's been a labour of love, an absolute labour of love. So I'm so glad that we've done it. Yeah, I'm proud of what we've done, and we're getting good responses to it. People really like it as a book. They say it's informative and quite humane in the way it looks at Larundel. And I think also I didn't want to have a diatribe against Larundel. I didn't want it to be just a negative, criticism of it. I want it to be a balanced assessment of Larundel. And I think people like the fact that it's a balanced assessment. So it wasn't all bad in Larundel, it wasn't all good. And I think that comes across really well in the narrative.
So you said you started about 10 years ago on the book. Do you feel like the narrative changed as you got through it and how you finished? Do you feel like you changed your perspective of Larundel, having been in there yourself?
I know that I had fairly benign experiences of Larundel. So I think in looking at particularly the past inmates' narratives and their experience of seclusion, ECT, treatments that were forced upon them, I had to really understand that other people's experience wasn't quite as benign as mine, and that in fact Larundel damaged people sometimes. It wounded them, wounded their souls sometimes. That it really was a multifaceted experience for many people over many years, and that there wasn't one narrative that you could have of Larundel. There was as many narratives as there were people who were there. So I think I became more cognizant of the damage it did to people, but also I was aware that for some people it provided asylum. It was actually asylum that we don't have now in our mental health system. And of course for the staff, particularly the nurses, they had a fabulous time at Larundel. For them it was camaraderie, a career path. They learned a lot about their craft. The whole thing was such a positive experience for them that which is really interesting, because in a way they couldn't see the inmates' experience for what as they experienced it. They couldn't see how we would have experienced Larundel, because they were so imbued by their practice of their work practices, the innovation that was being certainly in the 70s. Larundel was a place of innovation and optimism. They really thought they were doing really good things, and when they were presented with the Vertigan report in 1990. Which was a very, very critical look at mental hospitals, they were shocked at what they were reading as to what the experience of consumers was. They were really shocked that people had such bad experiences of the place. So they were a bit sort of taken aback by that report, I think. So yeah, interesting, very interesting.
And you also mentioned, psych wards of today, and curious about that too, how you might compare Larundel to a psych ward of today. Do you do that in the book as well?
We do. I haven't been in a public psych ward in its iteration now. I've only been in a private psych ward since 1991. But certainly I've drawn on other people's experience of psych wards now, and your experience and Julia Dempsey's experience, all of which were just shrouded in trauma. Today's psych wards are just places of mayhem and despair. And certainly that what came across was that they do not at all pretend to even offer asylum to the person who's being treated in them. So I think that in itself is a massive change. The fact that they don't even pretend to offer asylum, I think is really interesting, because at least at Larundel there were gardens that were beautiful. People all acknowledged the gardens. There was time in which to get well again, so you weren't chucked out after 7 days mad because someone mad and needs your bed. You actually had time to find some equilibrium. But having said that, there was this possibility of becoming institutionalized in Larundel, because it did overtake you in a way. It sort of took away your agency, and it really did everything for you. So you lost your life skills in a way, although the rehabilitation wards they had at Larundel did aim to rehabilitate people and to help them to go shopping, to cook, to catch public transport. So they had programs that were designed to give people life skills again, having spent time in Larundel that was, for weeks and months, if not years.
When did you realise that you could write these stories, that you could write?
I don't know. I know when I was writing this book about Larundel, I thought, gee, I'm just writing a really bad first year university essay. I was a bit worried. That what I was writing was absolute rubbish. It was really worried me. I learned a lot about writing prose when I wrote my memoir, Flying with Paper Wings. That was a really good experience in terms of learning a writing craft, and that was helped by Jackie Yao, who was my editor, and she's the one who asked me to write my memoir. And she'd worked as an editor at Penguin and at Ellen and Unwin, and she was a really highly regarded editor. And working with her on my manuscripts was really instructive, and I learnt so much. And Jackie very kindly helped us on this Larundel book as well. Invaluable help that she gave us, and so she taught me a lot about writing, and I needed to learn, because my writing can be very flowery, unfortunately, and a bit over the top. But just gaining confidence. Gaining confidence is really important.
Sorry, I'm just asking a few people to turn their mics off. So if we go back in time to when you actually, before you actually realised there was this thing called schizophrenia, were you a writer? Like, did you have any inclination that this was going to be your future?
No, I didn't. I wasn't a reader at school, so I wasn't even smart at school until really the last year. I was too busy playing sport. I was a sporty girl, and I loved sport. I played sport and I was good at it. So I spent my school years playing sport and not doing much academic work at all, and just really just staggering through each year with the exams and stuff and getting through. And then I think I found poetry in Form 5 and Form 6 at school, year 11 and year 12. And there was the teacher, Miss Vines, who taught me history at school, and then taught me English in HSC. And she was the first teacher ever to say to me, I think you have innate intelligence and potential to go to university. And she was into reading and literature and poetry and all those things that I didn't get at home, because home was so toxic and so destructive, because I come from a traumatic background. And she was, for me, a role model that I could look up to. And she was my way out of my destructive home in Ballarat and a way to another life. And so using my Miss Vines as a role model, as someone who loved literature and loved writing and poetry and really gave that love to me, was really, for me, just fantastic. It just saved my life. And so, but the thing was, in Form 6, I was in Form 5 too, I was looking at the poetry of T.S. Eliot. And even though I didn't understand what he was writing about, because his poetry is quite difficult, for some reason it touched me. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic. I want to be a poet. And I sort of declared I want to be a poet without ever having written a poem in my life. But I thought, I want to be a poet. And the irony of that is that in Form 6, I went to Melbourne to do a vocational guidance test, because I thought I was going to leave school and work in a factory. I was really struggling. And I did all the aptitude tests and the IQ tests and stuff. And the vocational psychologist said to me, look, you may as well leave school and work in a factory. You're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to do anything. And then they'd asked us they gave us a list of occupations to say what we'd like to do and like to be. And poet was one of the occupations. And I put poet, that I'd like to be a poet. And the guy looked at this thing and he said, look, you're not being very realistic here. I think you better reassess what you want to be and lower your expectations, because you're not going to be a poet. So it's so ironic, because after that, and this is, and again, without having written the poem, I wrote that. But the irony is I became a poet, and I don't know how it happened. I just, that words started falling into my realm, and I started shaping them into poems. And I really didn't get going until after my first psychotic episode, and when I started documenting my madness in poetry. And that was the beginning of my poetry, my poetic life, because documenting that madness in poetry for me was so important. It was my lifeline again, because when I'd write a poem, and in those days you wrote a poem with a pen on a bit of paper, when I held that poem in my hands, at the time when I was doing nothing much in my life and my life was shattered by schizophrenia, that poem on a bit of paper was evidence that I was still alive. It was testimony to my existence. And I needed that evidence at that time, because nothing else gave me a sense that I was still alive. So the poetry was so important as a lifeline. It was something I could do, and it showed me I could be creative. It showed me that there was a way out. And so I just kept writing poetry and kept writing poetry. And then I had enough for a collection. And in 1993, when I was 40, so life began at 40, Susan Hawthorne said, I'd like to publish your poems in a book. And so the opportunity she gave me, and I've thanked her every time I see her, I thank her for this. It was just the most magical moment, because from the day my first book was published, my life changed. I went from a person with no hope, no purpose, no meaning, and just being a person with schizophrenia, to being Sandy Jeff's poet. And that was transformative and revelatory for me, because it meant that I had a new title, and I had a positive title for myself, and it really changed my life. And I can't thank Susan Hawthorne enough for the opportunity she gave me.
So how did she find you, or how did you find her?
Well, it's not what you know, it's who you know, Heidi. I went to uni with Susan. She was a friend, and she had started Spinifex Press with her partner in 1990, I think it was, or thereabouts. And so it's not what you know, it's who you know. And so I showed her my poem. Not that I was showing people my poems, but I eventually showed them to her, and she said, I'd like to publish them. So that was just, for me, incredible. And I can't thank her enough. And to have hope, purpose, and meaning again in your life, you know, they're the pillars of recovery. They really are. And that's what, and my poetry gave me those pillars.
Do you believe in recovery?
Well, I think I'm recovered with my illness, not from it. So the poetry hasn't cured me of my madness, but it's given me a way of processing it, of understanding it, of connecting with other people, of sharing stuff with other people. Recovery, I think it's a very individuated thing. What is recovery, you know, and how do you measure it? Recovery for one person might be getting out of bed and walking to the letterbox one day of the week. Recovery for another person might be full-time employment. Like, what is recovery, and how best do you measure it? For me, I feel like I live tolerably with my schizophrenia. I still have symptoms that I deal with. I go to bed to my voices every night. I have delusions that are harboring in my psyche that sometimes pop out. I've got a reality. I wake up in the morning and do a reality check of my life. You know, I do an inventory of my thoughts to make sure they're still there, because I'm worried that they've been deleted overnight by the microchip. So for me, it's recovering with the illness still there, but managing as best I can, and living as tolerably with the voices as best I can. So I never set myself up as a paragon of recovery. I would never say that, but I have a tolerable life. I have a good life. I have a good life with my friends. I have Team Sandy. I call it Team Sandy. And Team Sandy are my two friends I live with, Robbie and Dido. Team Sandy consists of my hockey teams that when I could play hockey. I haven't played at all this year, but when I could play hockey, Team Sandy was part. Hockey teams are part of Team Sandy. My orchestras that I play in are part of Team Sandy. Our pets, our 3 cats and dog, they're part of Team Sandy. I consider my psychologists and psychiatrists a part of my Team Sandy. You know, Team Sandy has many, many elements to it. And you've got to curate it. I've got to curate Team Sandy, because if you don't curate it, it could fall apart. So you've got to look after your team. So having a team for me has been really important, and have all those elements, and to have them there as backups for me as a person has been really, really crucial. And you know, I feel very privileged to have a team. Many people in my position don't have a team. They don't have the privilege of this, and I really acknowledge that. And but I feel blessed to have this lovely Team Sandy that I can call upon. And I talked to some primary school kids. I talked about Team Sandy, and this little kid put his hand up and he said, "Sandy, can we be part of Team Sandy?" Oh. It was so lovely. It was so lovely. You know, this little kid. And another kid, when I was talking about my voices in the same class, another kid said to me, when I talked about what hearing voices was like, and explained my Tweedledum and Tweedledee voices and things, and he said, he put his hand up, and he said, Sandy, your voice is a bully. And then he said, he said something else about get rid of them. Don't listen to them. Saying, don't listen to Tweedledum and Tweedledee. They're just bullies. Don't listen to them. It was so cute. It was so cute.
That's what they teach kids these days, isn't it? To have a team around the kids that are getting victimised. So you're ahead of your time. You're 40 years ahead of your time.
Oh.
there's nuggets in there, Sandy. There's more than a couple, but one of them is recovered with, not from. You know, that's let's put that in quotes. Sandy Jeffs.
Yeah.
I'm just to mention a couple of just a few things in the chat box, because it's very interesting. The chat box has come alive, and
right.
One thing that I know that a lot of people might be wondering is what I don't think we should go there today, but what your opinion about trauma is in the background of schizophrenia. You know,
I have a lot of trauma I do have trauma in my background, but I often ask the question. I had the same trauma as my siblings, and they didn't go mad. I did, but I sort of look at, so I have trauma in my background, but I think I'm a constellation of many forces. So I'm a constellation of maybe trauma, maybe unbalanced chemicals, maybe too sensitive to the world. Is it my sexuality? Like, there's so many variables in one's life that you have to ask, are they part of the constellation of forces that create who you are? Is it the same response to a mad world? Like, I don't know what's created in me my madness, but I know I'm a constellation of many forces, and all those forces coalescing have created who I am. And maybe I'm just lucky at being 1 in 100. I'm very lucky.
Well, that kind of goes on to what somebody else has commented about. It's actually an enrichment of life to go. This is what Hugh said, that it's an enrichment of life to go through something like schizophrenia. I think that's what Hugh's saying there, that it's an actual divergence from mainstream, and it's actually a bonus to have something like schizophrenia. Would you tend to agree with that, or?
Oh, I know it's shown me a whole gamut of life that I would never have seen elsewhere. Like the fact that I've been in Larundel so many times and seen people in the extremes of the human emotions that you never see elsewhere in this world. Like you see people drag themselves out of madness and get out of the place and recover. You see people succumb to their madness. You see the whole gamut of the human experience. And if I hadn't been crazy and been in those places, I wouldn't have had the chance to witness the human condition in such extremities, but in all its grotesqueness and all its beauty. Within myself, it's shown me a lot of stuff of myself that I didn't want to know about personally. I prefer not to have known these things about myself, but it's shown me stuff in myself too that I didn't know was there. And it's informed my writing, I have to say. It's given me an incredibly big public life, which is so ironic, but also it's given me a writing life. So really delving the depths of my madness and other people's madness has been my writing and what I wanted to do in writing. And that's been interesting to sort of delve all those things. But, you know, if I had a choice, could go back 44 years and not be mad, I would choose not to be mad. It's been such a torturous, despairing, destructive experience for me. You know, the hell that it takes you into, this unremitting hell has been awful. And I think I have to acknowledge that it has been an unremitting hell, and that I would have preferred not to have been there. But having said that, it also has broadened my life experience to the point which I never would have had elsewhere in my life if I hadn't had this experience. So in that way, it's been not a gift, but it's been a privilege to see people and to see experiences and to see this gamut of humanity.
So what do you think about this word schizophrenia?
Well, it's full of baggage, isn't it? It's laden with baggage, unfortunately. I'm about reclaiming it. You know, I'm not afraid to say I have schizophrenia, and I do say to an audience I have schizophrenia and I'm not a monster. I'm hoping I'll be believed when I say I'm not a monster these days, given the baggage and given the PR disasters we keep having with schizophrenia. I mean, we had another PR disaster this week with a butcher in Geelong who was killed by his brother. The guy has stopped his medication, and again, another narrative, untreated schizophrenia leads to murder. So if we change the word, would it change stigma? I don't know, because in a way, it's more about people's bizarre behaviour in public that makes people think, oh, they're crazy, they're loco, they're psycho. You know, I think in a way that the antidote to stigma is wellness. So if we can keep ourselves as well as possible and keep other people as well as possible, that's the antidote to stigma. Because as long as we present ourselves in a bizarre fashion in public in front of people, they're going to look at us and say, you're crazy. Whether they say you're schizo or whatever, it doesn't matter, because your behaviour is still what they're reacting to. And I suppose the fact that it's been a century now of the term having been around, it's had a century to gather the baggage that is associated with it. And unfortunately, the media love chucking around the word schizophrenia. They love it. They feel compelled to say the person's got a diagnosis of schizophrenia when they murder someone. They can't help themselves. They can't stop themselves from doing it, I don't reckon. They just love it too much. So the word, if we change the word, what difference would it make? I don't know. I think it's about making us well, and so having better treatments and better outcomes for treatment and supporting us to be weller, supporting us to stay well and to want to stay well.
Yeah, and it kind of leads into the next question that Michelle raised, is whether mental illness really exists.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about trauma before having an impact on a lot of people, not everybody, but, you know, behind a lot of people's stories. So is it mental illness or is it something else?
Yeah, this is the perennial question, isn't it? Are we pathologising behaviour that ought not to be pathologised, the medical model, all this? I don't know how else to explain my experiences. I don't believe I'm just behaving behaving in the way I've behaved when I've been unwell to be different, to be differently behaved in a behavioural way. I don't feel as though I've had the choice to modify my behaviour when I've been so psychotic. I feel as though something else has happened in my body that has been unwell, a physical unwellness with the chemicals or whatever it is in my brain, that has created in me this behaviour that I would not normally do if I had a choice. So I tend to feel that there is mental illness. It's on a spectrum and there are degrees of it. But I think when people do things like murder their loved ones and murder kids and stuff in psychosis, I don't think if they had a choice, they wouldn't do that. I think they're driven by something which is very unwell in their mind, that they're seeing the world in a very, very skewed way and a very, very unwell way, and that their behaviour is driven by an illness type thing. And I don't think, because people wouldn't do those, they wouldn't do those things normally if they weren't unwell. So I tend to believe that my explanation for myself is that I've been unwell and I've needed to be dealt with by the medical model with medication and therapy and whatever else. Am I pathologising myself? I don't know. Am I deluded? Perhaps. I don't know. But I tend to feel that there is this thing, there is an illness component to it that needs to be looked after and somehow ameliorated. I know that's not a popular opinion among some of the consumer activists and some intellectuals who look at mental illness and say it doesn't exist, but I tend to feel there's something there. And I can't explain myself to myself other than having a label that says schizophrenia, and that my delusions and hallucinations are driven by something that is unwell in me. I don't know.
Michelle has asked, different Michelle, has asked, how long did it take you to accept that you had schizophrenia? And how did you get, if you got there, how did you get there? Is there any steps to the process?
I was diagnosed in 76, so back in the day, those days, it was a death sentence. And it was hard to take because all the messaging I got from the clinicians, and even when I got books from the library, all that I read, it said that I was on a trajectory of a journey to unreachable madness from which I'd never recover. So my prognosis was I'd go mad and I'd never recover. That was a pretty dire prognosis and a pretty dire label to carry at the time. It was an absolute death sentence. And I remember thinking, do I go and top myself now and get over and done with, because my life is going nowhere and I'm just on this road to disaster. So accepting that was really hard work. I think at the time I thought, gee, I don't even know. In the very beginning, I thought, what is this? I don't even know what it is. I had no idea what schizophrenia was. I had to sort of find out about it. And the more I found out about it, the more dire it looked. And I thought, gee, this is really grim. And my life is just grim. And what's going to happen to me? And then when I kept having episodes, though, so I kept, between 76 and 84, I had about six admissions to hospital. And I think as I kept having admissions, it kept on reinforcing in me that something's wrong, and maybe I have got schizophrenia. Maybe it is what they're saying I've got, and maybe I have got an issue. And I know I was taking in those days I was taking Largactil and Stelazine and Modicate and then Serenase, and then all those heavy duty medications, all of them. It's just unbelievable. And they did have an impact. They did, to some extent, they ameliorated my symptoms, but the side effects were horrendous. And that was awful. So accepting I had the illness, I did eventually. I think I thought, okay, I must have something which is really serious, and this is probably what it is. So in a way also, I'm pretty passive, and I'm pretty, I didn't get angry, and I didn't arc up, and I didn't become politicized, and I didn't rail against the mental health system or psychiatry like a lot of people were at the time. And maybe I wasn't critical enough of it. And I think also, I think I bought into the pessimism of my diagnosis too easily. I think I bought into the fact that my life was going nowhere, and I bought into it because all the messaging was all about that. And so I'd gone from a studentship at university and hope for a career in teaching maybe or whatever else, to graduating from uni and going on to the dole because I couldn't get a job because I was falling apart, then getting sick and going on to sickness benefits, and then eventually onto the invalid pension. So my trajectory was a downwardly spiraling one, and the invalid pension was the end game for me, and that was it really, and that was it. So in a way, I bought into that all. I bought into the whole pessimism of the whole thing, and if I had railed against it, if I had fought harder against it, would my life have been different? I don't know. But the thing was, though, I started writing, and that was my saviour.
Do you feel like that pessimism still exists? Do you feel like that message still being sort of given to people by the psych system or by the mental health system and by society and by ourselves?
Well, we have the thing in the Mental Health Act called presumption of capacity, don't we? Back in 76, there was no presumption of capacity even enshrined in the Mental Health Act. So this is enshrined in the Mental Health Act. Is it actually adhered to? I don't know. Well, back in my day too, everyone had schizophrenia. There was only schizophrenia, bipolar and depression really. Like everyone had those, and maybe a few people had borderline personality disorder. But schizophrenia was sort of a very an overarching term for everything in a way. Now it's a bit more differentiated. Is there more hope? I suspect not. I don't know. I suspect not, because the psych wards are such awful places and people don't seem to get much treatment there except pumped full of drugs and chucked out mad because someone mad who needs their bed. I can't see where the hope is.
Mm.
I can't see any hope in the mental health system we have now. So I despair for it and despair for people. I think I have to say that in '76, when I was diagnosed, I don't believe I heard anybody publicly standing in front of an audience and publicly saying I have schizophrenia. I don't remember hearing anyone getting up, even saying I have depression at the time. So I suppose what has changed over the years is that there are more people speaking out publicly about their mental health conditions, and that's a change. But is it giving people more hope? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. I think the health system is so debilitated and so broken. I can't see how it's giving people hope, actually.
So how important is writing and the arts for giving people that spark of light, would you say? And is it available to people these days, or do we have to go looking for it?
It seems that people have got to go looking for it these days. Back in the day when there were drop-in centres and, you know, and organisations ran programs for people with mental illness, like Nimoy had drop-in centres and so did Wellways, and there was all these places where people could gather and congregate with their cohort. Often they ran courses for people. I ran some writing classes for a lot of people in a lot of these places, and they ran art classes, they ran all sorts of things for people to do. And it gave people a sense, you know, something to do and something to aim for. And I think they were really good. I mean, it had the Splash Art studio in Preston, which was a space for artists with mental illness to go and be artists and be treated as artists. You know, fabulous stuff. Well, they've gone. So I don't know what people are doing. So this individualised recovery model it was big for a while. I don't know if it's still going, but it was big. The idea that we're going to put all these resources into your recovery and you're going to recover by yourself in the community who hate you. It sort of seems like a model to failure. And of course, they're going to throw all these resources at you. And then if you don't recover, you get blamed for not recovering because you put all these resources at your recovery. And so you get blamed for not doing it. And then you do it by yourself, atomized in this horrible stigmatizing community. So it seems like I don't know, it just seems like a funny model to me. And it just doesn't, it seems to be, and the idea of taking away places where people can meet their cohort and tell their war stories, to me seems a really bad move. And they lost their funding because they weren't individualised recovery, they were collectivist things, and you can't have collectives anymore because there are many institutions in the community. So I don't know. So writing is, I think, creativity, art, writing, music, all the arts, they're fundamental to someone finding hope, purpose and meaning. And I think the more we can inspire people to be creative is, I think, a fabulous thing, because, you know, to express yourself, to bring into being a work of art from nothing, from your imagination. It is the most empowering, wonderful thing to do. And to see your work on a bit of paper or on a canvas, or to hear it being played, it is the most wonderful, wonderful thing that can happen to you. And it gives you heart, it gives you hope, and it gives you a sense that there's something more than just being locked in your head in an unwell way. That if you can get out of your head and pour it onto paper or onto canvas or onto music, it's a really positive way to process anything, to process stuff.
All right, Sandy, I think we've come to about the 45-minute mark, which is about the end of Zoom attention span. There's so much, you know, gold information in everything you say, Sandy, and I'm just listening and just a privilege to be where I am listening to you speak. Can we just mention your book again, please, and where people can order it online to get it posted out to them?
So Out of the Madhouse, because from asylum to caring community, question mark, because there's a question mark about the caring community. You can, I know Readings Bookshop was selling it, but you can go online to, it's published by Australian Scholarly Publishing. Australian Scholarly Publishing. So they've got a website. You can go onto their website and buy it. I sell copies as well. If people want to email me, I can sell you a copy as well. I've also got my memoir for sale too, my Flying with Paper Wings. I've also got copies of that, plus poetry books, any poetry books as well.
Thank you, Sandy. We're going to go into Q&A now, and there's quite a few people here. So I'm going to open up the big screen again. I'm going to leave Sandy spotlighted. Angela, all right, go Angela.
How do you deal with the stigma?
Yeah, good question, Angela. And stigma is huge in our community at the moment, especially with all the PR disasters we're having with people doing things. I have rode roughshod over it, I have to say. I probably adopted the idea that if I call myself mad and crazy before somebody else does, then I've stolen their thunder. But stigma is huge, and the fact that I've got to tell people I'm not a monster because I have this diagnosis indicates that, you know, there's real serious issues out there with people's perception of us with schizophrenia. In a way, I've been a public loony for so long that I've just taken it on. I've just taken it on board and lived with it and rode roughshod over it. But having said that, I haven't had to work, so I haven't been in the workplace and have to deal with stigma in the workplace. I've been on I was on a pension for all my adult life, and now my diagnosis has changed from schizophrenia to old, and I'm on the old age pension. So with this new diagnosis of old, that's got stigma too. But really, with schizophrenia, you've just got to look. If people want to hate you because you've got a mental illness like schizophrenia, then that's their problem, not mine. But I suppose the problem is when they start treating you badly and really do things that are horrible to you, and, you know, troll you on social media, or, you know, just directly horrible to you because of that. And you have to, I think it's really, you know, we've just got to educate the community to say, look, we're not monsters. We're not all monsters.
That's what I do.
And we are.
I give talks to the community.
Yep.
Try to educate them. Yeah.
I think it's about educating.
Yep. Thanks, Angela. We just got another question.
Oh, it's just Tim. But thanks to both of you. It's always extremely wonderful hearing you talk, Sandy, and your poetry. And I really enjoyed your memoir. So I'll have to get this latest book as well. And Heidi, thank you so much for all you do and for bringing this to us. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
I was just going to make a comment, a couple of things. We're in Wollongong have been doing what we've called mad poetry workshops and readings, and publishing some of that work for the last four years. Firstly in partnership with the Wollongong Writers Festival, and then we're doing it with the poetry company called Red Room Poetry in Sydney. I love doing things in the mainstream, sort of bringing that voice there. We've also got online, if people are interested, a site called Clozapine Clinic, the Freighter Project, which is in a magazine called Verity La, where people can submit poetry to be published. So it's all from a mad point of view. Ben was a young poet who died too young here in Wollongong. But I just love the idea of having those workshops wherever we can have them for poetry. And yeah, so hopefully we can get that going again, Sandy, you know, or get you doing that. Are you doing workshops at the moment at all?
I haven't done it for a while. I haven't done it for a while, but I'm not very good at running workshops. I have had a go at them, but I reckon I'm not very good at it.
No.
But I met Benjamin Freighter at the for Matthew and others Mad Pride event back in 2006 or 7. Yeah, and I've got a signed copy of his chapbook, the first thing he put out. I've got a signed copy of it, so I'm really pleased to have it. And I've also got the book that the publishers put out a few years ago of his stuff.
Yeah, excellent. That's great. I recall that you were at that Mad Pride. Yeah. So thank you very much again.
Thank you very much. No worries.
Michelle, to me.
Thank you, Heidi. Sandy, a question about the writing craft. What's the difference, and what are the different joys of writing poetry to writing prose?
Very different process. I tend to write, well, yeah, it's a different process. Prose is much more sustained, and you've got to shape a paragraph and shape the sentence and shape a page and build your argument. So that for me was a different process to writing a poem, which is usually shorter, more based on inspiration or immediate inspiration, which you then turn into a poem by editing it. But the process is very different. The prose is sustained. If you're writing a book, you've got 260 pages of book to write. and you've really got to work a sentence well so that it works for the reader. And for me, it was really about honing those sentences and shaping the whole argument, and it was really quite hard. And also, it's just so sustained. But a poem is shorter. Like, a poem is much, much, much shorter, and a poem is much more truncated and much more condensed as well. So in a poem, you're saying a lot with few words, or trying to, and the fewer words you have just to say the biggest bang for your buck is really hard sometimes, because you can lose in a poem the power of it by being over too wordy. So you've got to be mean with words in poetry and expansive with words in prose, but to do them all sensitively and appropriately.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Has anybody else got a question? Tristana?
Yep. Hi, Sandy.
Hi.
Congratulations again, and thank you for this wonderful talk. Also to you too, Heidi, for providing the platform. Sandy, I've just recently just got into poetry. Didn't really think I had it in me. And it's, instead of like doing a piece of artwork, it's just nice to be able to put some words together and compile a bit of a story. But sorry, I'm still a bit nervous at the moment, but just was really interested to hear about your talk and talking about your experiences and the trauma. And look, I think it's great that you've been able to be brave and write a book, and I think you're a real sense of inspiration for me. And yeah, I really just keep on doing what you're doing, and I'll keep on doing what I'm doing. And I sent a link in the chat thing. There's a particular program in Melbourne called the Crop Writing Group, and anyone anyone can join if they want to. So yeah, keep going, Sandy. I'm following you. Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really I really appreciate that, because I've been around for so long, and I do say that my only relevance now as a public loony is because I'm a relic from Larundel. So because I remember the old days back in the big institutions. So and that knowledge is now being lost by so many people now dying who are there, and it's a lost world and a lost time. So that's my only relevance as a public loony, I think, because I'm historic.
You're part of the what do they say? You're part of the walls of the building, or the sounds and the experiences that you've obviously experienced. Yeah.
Oh God, I feel so
Thanks,
old.
Thanks, Tristana.
No worries.
Anybody else? You can raise your hand, or we've got Judy Wolf there.
Oh, hi, Judy.
I'm actually her partner loosely.
What's your name?
I'm Alex. I've read Sandy's books, and I go to a poetry reading, and I find her very honest and straightforward. The only thing I found with the book was she used the word mad a lot, and it's like you're bouncing people. Actually, if someone looks up something and they're a schizophrenic or thing, they say, I don't want to know about it, which is the vast majority of Australians. So I found that word a bit disconcerting in your book, although the book was great and everything. I sent it to my sister in Tassie. She loved it, and she's pretty hard to please. So thanks very much, and well done today. Yeah.
So
Thank you. I must say, our book's been shortlisted for the Community History Awards too. So we find out at the end of October how it goes. So that's lovely. That's been shortlisted for that. We're really pleased, and it mustn't be a dud if it's been shortlisted for that prize. So
you're almost royalty.
She is.
Was that Alex?
You're almost royalty.
I don't think so.
There is a few letters after your name now, Sandy, I believe.
Oh yeah.
What are those letters?
OMG.
What?
Oh my God.
OMG. No, I got an OAM in January this year, and I don't know who nominated me. I don't know how it happened. I honestly, it's not something I talk about, because it's sort of, I I feel funny about it. It's really odd.
All right, thanks, Alex. And that is a very contentious issue. That word. Anybody else got a question? Virginia Duval.
I just want to say I look up to all you guys, and you do such amazing work, and you too, Heidi.
Yeah, go Heidi.
Yeah, go Heidi.
Yeah.
Sandy, it's the Sandy hour.
Go Sandy. Go Sandy.
Thanks, Virginia. Aileen, hi Aileen. Aileen and Ron.
I would just like to say, Sandy, that we always remember hearing you read When She Gently Brushed My Hair. 20 years ago it was, and we treasure it today. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a poem in my first book, Poems from the Madhouse, and it's about a woman who, at a time when I was taken to Arundel and really was abused by the nurses on being admitted, and I was sitting in this dormitory, which is a horrible dormitory, just weeping, and this woman who couldn't speak any English came and started brushing my hair, and I wrote this poem where she gently brushed my long hair to honour this woman. And some years later, like I think about 5 years ago, I was giving a talk somewhere, a book group somewhere in Brunswick, and I read that poem and told the story, and this woman said, "I know who brushed your hair. I know the woman." and her name is, and she was she spoke a foreign language, so she wasn't English, and she was speaking this foreign language to me. And when the woman said her name is Mildred Goppers, and she was Polish, I think, and she said she always brushed people's hair, and she would have been in Arundel. She was in Arundel the same time as I was, and so it would have been her. So now I have a name for the woman who brushed my hair. I know, it's the most wonderful thing. And people love that poem because it's such a gentle poem about this woman brushing my hair. Extraordinary. So I can't cut my hair because I can't read that poem with short hair. So I have to keep my hair long.
What's the poem called?
As She Gently Brushed My Long Hair.
Okay, cool.
It's in my first book, Poems from the Madhouse.
Yep, awesome.
All right, thank you, Aileen.
Yep.
Tristana, and then who was the second person who jumped in there? Oh, okay, Tristana.
Sandy, how would you, I know you probably get these questions all the time, but how would you tell someone who is an artist but has difficulty maybe sometimes putting art on paper, and then more so getting into poetry, because poetry is a form of art. So how would you tell me or someone that they're starting out to become a bit of a poet? What do you say to people? Like, do you have any idea, like encouragement?
First of all, just do it. Just keep writing. You only get, actually there are two things. You get better by doing it, so keep writing and keep writing and keep practicing your craft. And the other thing is to read other poets. So, you know, like athletes train for sporting events by lifting weights and doing exercises and training for their sport. You've got to train to be a poet and an artist too. So read other poets. And see how they construct their poems and see how they write their poems. And by reading other poets, you get a sense of how they do it and what poetry is about. And I think by reading other people, you learn to eventually find your own voice by doing it, actually doing it, writing and writing and writing, and just practicing your craft. It's the only way you get better at it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the tips.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tristana. So I think that brings us to the end of our interview with Sandy today.
So very, very quickly, I would like to thank you very much for organising this and for the positive impact you've made on the lives of many, many people, particularly on the peninsula, for 20 years. Thank you.
I'm actually at the moment writing a haiku diary of the COVID-19 pandemic. So every day I diarise in haikus, and I've got about 1,000 haikus, I reckon, done so far. It's ridiculous, and it's a bit obsessive at the moment, but it's been a nice way. It's been a way of processing this COVID madness that we're in, and making some sense of it, and having something at the end of the month. So after 7 months of lockdown, I've got all these haikus, and it's a diary. So that's my way of dealing with the COVID pandemic and being locked away and confined to our barracks.
All right. Is there any other closing comments?
I just want to thank you, Heidi, for having me, and thank everybody for coming online today. Thank you so much. I never know whether what I say is rubbish or outrageous or so conservative it's ridiculous or whatever, but
Sandy, you're a legend, living legend, and we love you, and we're so grateful that you speak and write and hold our stories, and you know, your stories too hold our stories. So thank you everyone so much for
Thanks for
joining.
having me.